I sealed the bond on a Tuesday. I remember the day with the clarity of a man who made a clean cut and chose not to look at the wound afterward. I was 23. The moonseers had come to Vorreth 3 days before, 2 of them, old women wrapped in gray wool who smelled of pine ash and certainty. They placed a folded parchment on my council table and told me the name of my fated mate was written inside, along with the approximate year of her birth, still some years off, they said, and that the bond would find me when the time came, as bonds always did. I thanked them, sent them to the guest quarters, ate my supper, and spent the night thinking. By morning, I had decided. Vorreth was a border fortress kingdom, the northernmost hold in the wolf territories, and it ran on precision the way a water clock runs on gravity. Remove one part and everything floods. My father had lost 3 years to grief when my mother died, and in those 3 years a border dispute had cost us 6 villages and 400 wolves. I had watched him grieve. I had watched the kingdom leak. I had decided at 17 that I would not replicate the experiment. A mate was a vulnerability. Specifically, she was a vulnerability shaped exactly like the thing I most wanted, which made her the most dangerous kind. I was good at wanting things and not having them. I had trained myself to that competency young. So I took the parchment, still sealed, the name unread, and I locked it in the archive stone in the throne room. The archive stone was Vorreth's oldest artifact, a block of gray granite set into the floor before the dais, smooth on top, carved underneath with the names of every Alpha and Luna who had ever ruled here. I pressed the parchment flat against the underside, spoke the sealing word in the old tongue, and felt the stone take it. Then I went to the empty throne beside mine, my Luna's throne, tradition said, though I had never thought of it as anyone's but a placeholder, and I removed the nameplate from above it. My wolf did not speak to me after that. He did not leave. He was still there, the way a fire is still there when you've banked it down to coals. He simply went quiet. I think he understood that I was serious. I think, in 40 years, he never quite stopped waiting. The steward's name was Aldrich. He had worked in Vorreth's inner hall for 31 of those 40 years, and he knew better than to bring me news that was not news meaning. He knew better than to bring me anything that did not require a decision. So when he appeared at the threshold of my working room on a Thursday afternoon in late autumn, holding his hands in the patient way he held them when he had something he could not quite classify, I set down my pen. "There is a woman in the archive hall," he said. "There are often women in the archive hall," I said. "It is an archive." She asked about the empty throne. I looked at him. "She asked me," he said carefully, "why the throne beside yours has no name above it. She said—" He paused. He was choosing his words with the delicacy of a man diffusing something. "She said she had been in 7 fortress halls this season, and all of them had 2 names above the paired thrones, and she was curious whether Vorreth's was missing because the Luna had died, or because there had never been one, or because the nameplate was being repaired." I was quiet for a moment. "Who is she?" "A delivery. Herbalist's apprentice from the Vethrun quarter. Her master sends the fortress its medicinal stores twice a year. Her name is Marin. She is perhaps 22. "She is not," he added, with the faint inflection of a man providing complete information, "anyone." I should have told him to give her the payment and send her back through the gate. I said, "Send her to me." I do not know what I expected. Someone who looked like a portent, perhaps. The moonseers always looked like portents. They had cultivated the appearance deliberately, I think, the gray wool and the careful silences. In 40 years I had received 7 sets of moonseers, and they all looked more or less the same, like women who expected to be taken seriously and had done the costuming accordingly. Marin looked like a woman who had walked a long way in sensible boots. She was carrying a satchel that smelled of dried thyme and something sharper, yarrow, I thought, and under it something I could not name. She was average height, ordinary coloring, brown hair pulled back with a piece of cord because the tie had apparently given out somewhere on the road and she had improvised. She looked at the room with the frank curiosity of someone who was genuinely interested in rooms. She looked at me the same way. "You are the Alpha King," she said. It was not a question, but it was not particularly reverent either. It was the tone of a woman confirming a fact so she could move on to the next fact. "I am," I said. "I'm sorry about the throne question," she said. "I asked your steward, not you. I didn't intend it to become a summons. I was curious. I'm often curious about things I probably shouldn't be curious about." She said it without apology, just the candid inventory of a person who knew her own tendencies. "If it's a private matter, I won't press it." "It is not a private matter," I said, which was a lie of significant proportion. "It is simply the case that Vorreth has not had a Luna." 40 years, she said. I looked at her. "Your steward mentioned it," she said. "He said you had ruled alone for 40 years. I thought that was a long time." She tilted her head very slightly. "It is a long time, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, "it is." She seemed to accept this as sufficient and moved on. "I have your delivery in the outer hall, 3 months of standard medicinal stores, plus a double quantity of woundwort because your steward's last order specified you expected a difficult border season. Should I go over the inventory with your quartermaster or leave the list with you?" I said, "The quartermaster." She nodded, shifted her satchel and turned to go. And my wolf moved. Not violently, not the surge I might have expected from 40 years of banked silence. It was quieter than that, more like a man who has been sitting motionless in a dark room, suddenly becoming aware of a source of warmth he hadn't noticed was there. A slow, certain turn towards something. I said, "Marin." She stopped. "How long are you in Vorreth?" "Tonight and tomorrow morning," she said. "I have a delivery in Caldenmere by the following midday." "Stay for the evening meal," I said. She looked at me with the direct, unperplexed gaze of a practical woman receiving an unusual invitation. She was working out whether it was an imposition to refuse or an oddity to accept, and she was doing the math openly, without pretending she wasn't doing it. "All right," she said, and went to find the quartermaster. I do not know how to describe what happened in the archive hall. I know what happened mechanically. She came back through the inner corridor after the inventory was done, because the shortest route from the quartermaster's room to the guest quarters ran past the throne room, and the throne room's main doors were standing open because Aldrich had been airing it, something he did on Thursdays, a domestic routine so old it had become invisible to me. She walked past the open doors and paused, because she was the kind of person who paused at open doors. I was standing near the archive stone. I don't know why I was standing near it. I had been avoiding standing near it for approximately 40 years. I usually crossed to the left side of the dais and simply did not look at it. But I had been thinking all afternoon about the question she had asked my steward, and I had found myself in the throne room without quite deciding to go there, standing in front of the stone, looking down at it. The stone began to glow when she stepped into the doorway. It was not dramatic. It was not a blaze or a flash. It was the way embers glow when you open a flue and a breath of air finds them. A deep amber warmth, rising from inside the granite as if the light had been in there all along, waiting for a sufficient reason. Marin said from the doorway, "What is that?" "The archive stone," I said. "It holds the records of the ruling line." She came into the room. She was looking at the stone with the same frank curiosity she had aimed at everything else. The room, me, the empty throne. She walked toward it and crouched down, putting her face near the surface, and the amber light intensified slightly. "It's warm," she said, hovering a hand over it. "Is it supposed to do that?" "No," I said. "It has not done that in 40 years." She looked up at me. In the amber light, her face was very clear, not remarkable, but very present in the way faces are when a light source is close and honest. She was waiting for me to explain. I could have told her the stone was faulty. I could have sent for Aldrich and had him show her to the guest quarters and spent the evening eating alone at the end of the council table, which I had done for 40 years without particular distress. I had made that choice before. I was good at that choice. My wolf said, very quietly from somewhere in the center of my chest, "Her name is already there." I had not heard his voice in 40 years. I sat down on the dais steps. It took me several minutes to trust my own composure enough to speak. Marin waited. She was good at waiting, not the performed patience of someone who is pretending not to be impatient, but the genuine stillness of a person who finds silence acceptable. She sat cross-legged on the archive hall floor, her satchel beside her, and looked at the stone, and did not rush me. I told her about the parchment. Not all of it, not immediately. I started at the far end, the moon seers, the border wars, my father's grief, my decision. I told it in the way I would have told any administrative history, cleanly, sequentially, without inflection. She listened without interrupting. The amber light in the stone shifted occasionally, brightening or dimming in small pulses, as if it were following the story. When I reached the part where I had sealed the parchment into the stone, she said, "What did it say?" "I don't know," I said. "I never read it." She was quiet for a moment. "You put a letter in a box without reading it?" "Yes." "For 40 years?" "Yes." She thought about this. "That is," she said, with the considered tone of someone choosing precision over tact, "an extraordinary thing to do." I was aware of that. "Were you not curious?" "I was," I said. "I was very curious. That was part of why I didn't read it." She looked at me for a long moment, not with pity, not with judgment, but with the attention of someone who has just received a piece of information that reframes other information, and is quietly updating her understanding. "And the stone is glowing now," she said. "Yes." "Because of me," she said, not a question. She had done the arithmetic. "That would appear to be the case," I said. She was quiet again. The stone pulsed its amber warmth between us. Outside the high windows of the throne room, the Vorreth sky had gone the dark blue of early evening, and somewhere on the upper parapet a watchwolf was calling the hour, a long low note that the fortress walls caught and carried. "I think," Marin said, "you should open it." "Yes," I said, "I think so too." The unsealing word in the old tongue was the same word I had used to seal it, spoken in reverse order. I had not spoken either word in 40 years, and was faintly surprised to find I remembered the reverse perfectly. Some things stay, even when you are actively discouraging them. The granite made a sound I had no word for, not a crack, not a chime, something between the two, a resonance. And the parchment was simply there on the surface, as clean as the day I'd pressed it in, the old seal still unbroken. I handed it to Marin without opening it. She looked at me. "It's yours." "Open it," I said. She broke the seal. The parchment was thin, old language script in the moonseer's careful hand, 2 lines. Her lips moved slightly as she read, and then she stopped and looked at me, and her expression was not frightened, not overwhelmed. It was the expression of a woman who has received information that is accurate and is deciding what to do with it. "It says my name," she said. "Yes." "It says the year I was born." "Yes." "That was before," she stopped. "Before you were born," I said. "Yes. They gave it to me 8 years before your birth, by my best estimate of what the year on the parchment corresponds to in the current reckoning." She set the parchment down on the stone very carefully, the way people set down things they are thinking about dropping. She looked at it. She looked at me. "You didn't know," she said. "No, I sealed it unread. I did not know your name." "And your wolf," she said. "He hasn't spoken in 40 years." "No." She was still looking at me with that considering, present quality. Not a woman being swept away by destiny. A woman thinking clearly about a very strange situation. "I came to deliver woundwort," she said. You did, I said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, a small exhale, surprised and almost amused. I asked about the throne because I was curious. I always ask. My master says it will get me into trouble someday. She looked at the stone, which was pulsing its amber warmth in slow, quiet intervals. I suppose today is that day. Marin, I said, I want to be exact with you, because I have already been imprecise on this subject for 4 decades, and I find I have no appetite for further imprecision. She looked at me. The bond is real, I said. The stone confirms it, and my wolf confirms it, and you are standing in this room because 40 years ago I made a decision that I believed was correct, and that I now believe may have been, at minimum, incomplete. I am not asking anything from you. I am telling you what is true because you are owed the truth and because you were curious. I paused. About the throne. She looked at the empty throne beside mine, at the absent nameplate above it. What is under the stone? She asked. The underside, I said, carries the carved names of every Alpha and Luna who has ruled Vorreth. Is there a name there now? She said, under the Luna's throne. I had not looked. In 40 years I had not looked. I stood up from the dais steps. I crossed to the Luna's throne, the empty one, the placeholder, the seat I had walked past without looking at for 4 decades, and I bent down and looked at the underside of the stone seat. My hand, when I lifted the lamp, was steady. I had trained it to be steady. But the light showed me the carving plainly enough. Deep-cut letters in the old Vorreth script, worn to the smoothness of great age. A name. Her name. 40 years older than the parchment. Cut into the throne in the old script, as old as the archive stone itself. I stood up. My wolf in my chest was making a sound I had no precedent for, not howling, not speaking, something quieter, the sound of a creature that has been waiting with patience it did not quite have and has finally been permitted to rest. I looked at Marin. Your name, I said, is under the throne, in the oldest carving in Vorreth. It predates the parchment by at least a generation. She stood up from where she had been crouched near the archive stone. She crossed the room and looked at where I was pointing, bending low with the lamp I offered her, and she read the carving. She stayed bent for a long moment. When she straightened, her face was very still. I have a delivery in Caldenmere tomorrow, she said. I know. I can't just, she stopped. I don't know you. No, I said, you don't. You don't know me. No, I said. I know your name has been carved in my throne room since before either of us was born. I know my wolf, who has not spoken in 40 years, has not been quiet since you walked into the archive hall. I know the bond is real. I held her gaze. I don't know you. I would very much like to. She was looking at me with the direct, undeceived assessment I had come to understand was simply how she looked at things. No performance, no pretense of being unmoved, just a person deciding what was true. You've been running Vorreth alone for 40 years, she said. Yes. Because you thought a mate was a vulnerability. Yes. Was it worth it? It was a direct question, the kind I had spent 40 years deflecting with administrative language. I found I did not want to deflect it. No, I said, not particularly. She was quiet, the stone pulsed. Outside, the watchwolf called again. I'll stay, she said, for tonight, and I'll send word to Caldenmere about the delivery. She looked at the empty throne and then at me. And I'll ask you questions. I ask a lot of questions. I've noticed, I said. It doesn't bother you. I thought of 40 years of men who brought me only decisions. 40 years of precise, managed information flowing in one direction. No, I said, it does not bother me at all. The evening meal in Vorreth's council hall was served at the long table always, with candles at both ends and the fire banked high against the northern cold. I had eaten at that table alone, or with counselors, for 40 years. Aldrich, who was excellent at his work and had learned when not to comment on things, set two places at the head end of the table, closed together rather than at opposite ends, and withdrew without a word. Marin ate with appetite and without ceremony, which I found unexpectedly restoring. Court meals had a particular gravity to them, the weight of formality, the calculation of each plate and pour. She ate the bread before anything else because she was hungry from the road, and she picked up the wrong fork and used it anyway without embarrassment, and she asked me 11 questions over the course of the meal. She asked about the border disputes. She had heard something in Vethrun, she said, about a southern incursion, and wanted to know whether it was true and how serious. She asked about the watchwolf rotation, because she had noticed the calling pattern from the archive hall, and it struck her as efficient. She asked about the medicinal stores, specifically whether the fortress's wolves had been getting enough ironleaf in their standard rations, because ironleaf was chronically undersupplied in northern territories and deficiency presented as early winter fatigue, which was often mistaken for simple cold season languor. She asked whether I slept well. That one stopped me. "Why do you ask?" I said. "You have the look," she said, "of someone who has been competent for a very long time and has perhaps replaced sleeping with working. I know the look because my master has it. He sleeps 4 hours and calls it sufficient. It is not sufficient." "I sleep adequately," I said. "How many hours?" "Enough." She looked at me with frank skepticism. "When did you last eat a meal before midday?" I considered this honestly. "Last week," I said, which was technically accurate and strategically imprecise. She shook her head slowly, not with reproach, just with the measured recognition of a woman cataloging a set of problems she had not anticipated cataloging that evening. My wolf made the resting sound again, deep in my chest. I had no other word for it. Resting. The sound of a long tension easing. We talked until the candles had burned low and the fire had settled to its coals. She told me about Vethrun, the herb quarter, which I had never visited, a district of modest buildings and complicated smells where the herbalists trained their apprentices over 7-year terms. She told me about her master, who had trained her himself because her parents had died when she was 9, and he had known them and felt it was owed. She told me this without seeking my response, simply as a fact of her history, delivered in the same tone as the ironleaf deficiency data. "I'm sorry," I said. "It was a long time ago," she said. "He was a good guardian, he still is." She looked at the guttered candle nearest her. "I think he will be surprised when I send the Caldenmere message." "What will you tell him?" She thought about it. "I'll tell him I was asked to stay in Vorreth," she said. "That is true. I'll tell him the archive stone has my name in it." She paused. "He will want to see it." "He may come," I said. "Vorreth has no prohibition on herbalists." She smiled then, briefly, a small and private expression that was nothing like a court smile. It was the smile of a person who had found something genuinely funny about a situation and was allowing themselves the luxury of noticing. "You're very formal," she said. "I have been told that." "Is it armor?" I looked at her. "I ask," she said, "because it seems like it might be, and if it is, I want you to know that you don't have to wear it while I'm here. I am not going to think less of you for having normal qualities." It was, I think, the strangest and most clarifying thing anyone had said to me in 40 years of governance. "Yes," I said, "it is armor." "I thought so," she said without triumph. "It's good armor, very well made. You just don't need it right now." I did not sleep that night, but not in the way Marin had suspected. I sat in the archive hall with the lamp, and I read for the first time every name carved under the paired thrones of Vorreth, all the alphas and lunas of the ruling line, generation after generation, each pair weathered into the stone with the smoothness of years. They were not grand names, most of them. They were simply names. Kedron, and then beside Kedron, carved with the same tool in the same hand, the same depth, Marin. Not recent, ancient, the same age as the stone. I pressed my thumb against the letters of her name and stayed like that for a long time. My wolf was quiet, but it was a different quiet from the 40 years prior. That had been the quiet of something banked and withheld. This was the quiet of something present, alert, watching with satisfaction from a place behind my ribs. In the morning, Marin found me in the archive hall. She had slept, had the unforced color of someone who slept easily and woke without ceremony. She looked at me and at the stone. "You read them all," she said. "Yes." "How many pairs?" 19 before ours. She sat down cross-legged on the floor near the stone, the way she had the evening before, as though the archive hall were simply a room she was comfortable in. The amber warmth rose as she settled. "I need to tell you something," she said. I waited. "I don't know you," she said again. "I know that is something I've said, but I want to be clear about what I mean by it because I think it's important to be clear." She looked at the stone, not at me. "I'm not afraid of the bond or of the parchment or of the carving. Those are facts and I've made my peace with facts before. What I mean is that the bond is one thing, it's the beginning of something, but you are a person, and I would like to know the person, and I think you haven't been known by very many people for a very long time." I sat with that for a moment. "No," I said, "I have not." "So I'm staying," she said. "Not because of the carving, not because of the parchment, because I want to know the person." She looked at me directly. "And because I think the person has been alone in this fortress for 40 years, eating meals past midday and sleeping 4 hours and calling it sufficient. And that is, in my professional opinion as someone who has studied the physical consequences of extended deficiency, not actually sufficient." My wolf in my chest made a sound that was entirely new, something between recognition and relief. The sound of a creature that has not had a name spoken to it in 40 years and has just heard one. He spoke aloud then. I heard him as clearly as I had heard him as a young man before the silence. A low, even sound, addressed not to me but to her, carrying her name in the old tongue the way the stone carried it, without question, without ceremony, as if it had always been the case. Marin heard it. I could see she heard it, though she could not have known it was him. Wolves do not speak aloud to anyone but their alpha as a rule, and he had not spoken to me in 40 years, but he spoke to her. She was very still for a moment. "What was that?" she said quietly. "My wolf," I said. "He is saying your name." She looked at me. Her face did something I did not have words for, not overwhelmed, not frightened, but quietly moved, in the way a person is moved when something they did not quite dare to expect turns out to be real. "He knows it," she said. "He has always known it," I said. "I think he has been waiting a long time to say it." We placed the nameplate above the Luna's throne that afternoon. Aldrich brought it. I had asked him that morning to have one made, and he had looked at me with the calm face of a man who had been waiting 31 years for this particular request, and had the panel already cut and lettered by a craftsman in the lower hold, because Aldrich was excellent at his work and had, I think, never entirely stopped expecting the day would come. He set it in place without comment. The carved stone underside, the parchment from the archive, the amber warmth of the stone, and the nameplate above, all of them said the same thing now. In their different materials and ages, all of them arrived at the same answer by different roads. Marin stood and looked at it. I stood beside her. "It's my name," she said. "Yes," I said. "I have never had my name above anything larger than my master's front door," she said. There was something in her voice that was not quite humor and not quite awe, the note of a person who is genuinely surprised by their own life. "The nameplate," I said, "will be considerably more durable." She laughed then, a real one, brief and unguarded, and the archive stone threw its amber warmth across the throne room floor. My wolf settled into the quiet of a creature who has been patient and has been right. Outside, the Vorreth snowfields lay pale and still under a mid-morning sky, and the watch wolf on the parapet was silent for once, as if he too understood that something that had been waiting was finished waiting. Maren sent her message to Caldenmere that afternoon, and wrote to her master in Vethrun, and asked me 11 more questions at supper, and corrected my assessment of my own sleeping habits with a directness that I found, to my own surprise, entirely welcome. I did not put the armor back on. I had thought for 40 years that I had made a practical decision on a Tuesday, and that the kingdom had been the better for it. Perhaps the kingdom had been adequately governed. That I will grant myself. But adequate governance and a life are not the same measurement, and I had confused the two for longer than was necessary. Maren was not what the moonseers had promised exactly. They had spoken of a fated mate as if she were a strategic asset, a consolidation of destiny, a wolf bond resolved. She was that, in the formal sense. But she was also a woman who ate the bread before the rest of the meal and asked whether you were sleeping enough and wanted to know the person and not merely the king, and who had walked into Vorreth to deliver woundwort and had paused in a doorway because she was curious about a throne, and had cracked open, with one question to a steward, something I had kept sealed for 40 years without knowing she was doing it. My wolf had her name in his mouth from the moment she stepped into the archive hall. He simply waited until I was ready to hear it. That is, I have come to understand the nature of things that are destined. They do not require your cooperation to be true. They only require, eventually, that you stop pretending they aren't. The stone carries her name. It always did. It was simply waiting for her hand on it, and her practical questions, and her sensible boots after a long road, to show the warmth it had been keeping all along,